Okay, that's us recording. Away you go, Donald.
Okay, I'll just bring my presentation up. Okay, hello. Thanks for inviting me along. I'm Donald MacKinnon. I'm chair of the Scottish Crofters Federation and a crofter from the Isle of Lewis. I'm based in Arnold. That's our family croft there. You can see in the picture, the croft's kind of stretched for about half a mile down to the sea, like a lot of crofts in Lewis, that sort of style. And this is me trying to train my new sheepdog. She's a year old, and we're getting there slowly. But yeah, it's a mission, but it's good fun. It's good fun.
So is that in Arnold, or is that
that is in Arnold? Yeah,
in Arnold. Okay.
Yeah, this is Arnold. So this is our family croft. I actually sublet it at the moment, and I have another croft, but I'll maybe come to that later on. So I've always been interested in crofting. Grew up, we always had sheep, and I grew up helping out my family with the sheep. Usually had small numbers, you know. We have about 20 odd breeding ewes, and then cut that right down to under 10 and kept it going for a while there. And yeah, I was always really interested in it. Always liked helping other people out, and we've still got quite a good decent number of active crofters in the village, so we still do a lot of things together, which I think helps and makes the whole system work better. And there is a social aspect to it too, which is really good. So yeah, I've always had that interest. But like a lot of young people here, when I finished school, I did go off to university in Glasgow to study geography and politics. And so I reluctantly left the croft behind. But that kind of brought with it its own opportunities, and I really enjoyed my time at uni. It was good. I liked the course that I was studying, and it also gave me some unexpected opportunities. That picture's a bit rubbish there, but I think this was, I'm forgetting my dates now, but I think this was in 2015. Maybe it's 2014. There was the Scottish Crofters Federation held an event in Glencanis up in Sutherland, in Assynt, called Young Crofters 2020. And this was a kind of residential event, trying to get together young people interested in crofting who could get together and think about what they wanted to see crofting would look like in 2020. So I saw this advertised and I thought, well, I've never been up that far north before. Usually stop at Ullapool and go across on the ferry. So I'll take the opportunity and go along to this thing. And I probably wouldn't have done that had I been based on the island. I mean, although I suppose it's closer as the crow flies, it would have just been a bit of a hassle. But because I was away at uni, it just kind of made sense that I would be able to take a few days off and go up there. So I went along and really enjoyed it, and kind of learned more about SCF as an organisation and what it does, and why it's important, and that they needed young voices involved in that. So I kind of got more involved in the organisation slowly. So I should probably say a bit about SCF. So SCF is the only organisation that is solely dedicated to representing the views of crofters and crofting. It started off as the Scottish Crofters Union back in the day, in the 80s, I think it was, set up by Jim Hunter and many others, a lot of them based in the Western Isles. And its kind of base has always been around the Skye and Lochailsh area. Our current office is in Kyle. We're a membership organisation, and almost all of our core funding comes from membership subscriptions. So we have just under 2,000 members at the moment. Membership is just over £60, 60 odd pounds a year. We do have a young crofters discount, half price. Members get a copy of the Crofter 3 times a year, our magazine. We also offer a free legal helpline through Inksters, the solicitors based in Glasgow. And we offer advice and support to members. But most importantly, we are a voice for our members. And that's where I kind of came to next in my involvement with the organisation, was that because I was based in Glasgow, going through to Edinburgh and speaking in Holyrood at the cross-party group on crofting, and I gave evidence to a committee as well. That became sort of easier, which was kind of bizarre, really. You know, that being based down there made these things just that little bit simpler for me. And the thing that struck me in those meetings, in the cross-party group on crofting in particular, was you would go into this room in Holyrood, and you know, I'm very interested in that. I was studying politics at the time, and it was quite fascinating to get behind the scenes in the Parliament. But the thing that struck me in these rooms was that you look around and there were very, very few crofters in those rooms. You know, it was lots of people from different agencies. The only crofters were the ones who were there from the SCF, really. Zoom and the restrictions have been a bit of a leveler there, and now those meetings are online. And while I think, you know, returning to some physical meetings is going to be important for, you know, networking and things like that, I think keeping with this model of meeting online for things relating to the Highlands and Islands in particular, where distance becomes an issue. Yeah. We represent members from Argyll to Shetland and the Western Isles to, well, we have members from all over the world, but crofting members from the Western Isles to, I think we've even got some in Murray or certainly in Inverness. So, you know, we've got a huge area to cover when we're talking about crofting issues. So getting people to meet physically just doesn't always work. And it can, we did have some video links to some of those meetings. But I always think there's a bit of a power imbalance there when you've got a meeting taking place in a room and then you're on a screen somewhere or you're on the end of a phone call. You're not really on the same level as the other people in the meeting. So anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but I think it's important that we talk about that sort of thing. So I started to get involved in the organisation in that way, attending these meetings and representing them at various things. And then I was asked to join the board and eventually was vice chair. And then in January this year became chair of the organisation. So it's been a funny year for that to happen. And again, we've been doing a lot of stuff on Zoom, just like yourselves. But we've had really good engagement. You know, like I was just saying there, we're representing members from right across the Highlands and Islands. And we've found that we can get much more engagement in a Zoom meeting with a much richer conversation at times than we would if we tried to get people to come to Inverness, for example. Which inevitably is what we have to do as a central point, which just it doesn't fit with what we want to do a lot of the time. So we've found this has worked really well. So I'll maybe come back again into kind of the things that we're thinking about with SCF at the moment, but I'll just rattle through what I kind of my setup with my croft and what I do. So I started when I came home from uni. I was lucky enough to get a job with Carloway Community Association initially, and then now I work for Urus Saura Carloway, the Carloway Estate Trust, the local community landowner, and that was I'm kind of working on the same projects. It was just kind of worked out that way. So I was very lucky that I was able to get a job and able to move back home, and then I started deciding what I was going to do with the croft. So I got the sublet of our family croft, which is actually this one here, the one that I had in that initial photograph. So I started building up my sheep numbers. I keep blackface sheep, and also I've moved into North Country Cheviots. This is my new ram that I bought last year. He's a hill type Cheviot. So I'm building up the numbers of these at the moment. And then I was lucky enough to inherit my grandmother's croft and house, actually, which was a very, I was very lucky to be able to take on both of those. So now I'm the tenant of my own croft, and also the subtenant of the family croft that my parents' house is on. I also use a number of other crofts in the village, as is quite common. I think there's a bit of debate around that and whether it's how good that is for crofting. It does happen, you know, that tends to be, and if there is a few active crofters in an area, they will tend to use more than just one croft. And I think we need to have a conversation about that and see whether that's working or what needs to be looked at with that. So I use the common grazings quite a lot. So this is the view from Rochelle, and this is an old abbey, shieling, where the people in our village used to spend their summers. So Arnold is just there in the distance, and that's looking out to the Atlantic. So this is like the middle of Lewis, really. It's a pretty rough moor. It's got some nice grassy bits along rivers. Well, this is where my sheep spend most of their time, along this river, but I have to go out here to see if any of them have strayed. So for most of the winter, we're in an environmental scheme, so I can't have sheep out there from mid-October until the beginning of December. But for the rest of the winter, I have sheep out there. And I have sheep out there for most of the rest of the year, actually, at various different stages. But all of my ewes and all of my in-lamb ewes spend the winter out there. They come in for scanning when the pregnancy scanned in February, and the twins get kept in, and any singles that are looking a bit thin. And then all the empties and the singles go back out to the moor until a week before lambing, when I gather them in and bring them onto the crofts to get a little bit of feeding, and just so that I can keep an eye on them at lambing time. So that's basically the system I use. I included this picture here. This is something that I started using a couple of years ago, as electric fencing, which is, my fences are terrible. I need to do a lot of fencing work on them. So in the interim, this is very, very handy stuff, and I would recommend it to anyone. And being able to fit it on the back of the quad was an absolute revelation and changed my life. Saved an awful lot of time.
So does that work well with the sheep? Because I mentioned that to someone a few years back, and they said, well, because the fleece is so thick, it doesn't affect them, but presumably it does, though.
No, it's perfect. It's really good. I mean, you've got to. I would say that introducing it to them when they've just been shorn is probably an idea. Like sometimes I've had problems with the hogs. That when they've got they sometimes learn to just push underneath it. But I had the sheep behind electric for the whole of lambing, and I had sheep getting out, but it was usually a bit that I hadn't electric fenced, and I didn't have any problems with them going through electric fencing. So no, it's excellent stuff. You just need to get a good energizer. I use solar energizers, and they seem to work very well.
Do you have issues when you go to move them? So obviously, if they know that that's an electrified fence, have you got an issue at that point?
So they stay away from it, so you can use it to your advantage. They they do not want to go through it. So I try and I'm a bit geeky about grass and soil and stuff like that, and I don't do enough of it. I don't understand enough of the science and things, but that's what I like researching and looking into. And one of the things that I try and do is try and move the sheep on. So when they're grazing the crofts, obviously when they're on the moor and they're set stocked and they decide where they want to go. But when they're on the crofts, and particularly at this time of year when the grass is growing, I try and move them every 3 days as a sort of rule.
Wow,
but it doesn't necessarily always stick to that. But I try and move them. But the more important thing than the length of time they're grazing for is the amount of time that I rest it for after they've been on it. So much, much better to keep the sheep moving, to give them a smaller area. If you could move them every every day, then it would be even better. You know, the quicker you can move them on and rest that ground. And this the idea of having to eat down the grass until it's bare is not always the best way of dealing with the type of land that we have. And if you give the grass plant a chance to actually grow, if the grass grows, the sheep come along and eat it, and then that grass plant uses all its energy that it's got left to put up another few blades of grass, and then a sheep comes along and eats it again, then where's it going to get its next bit of energy from to put up some more sheep? So if you, after that first grazing, if you give that plant a chance to recover, it's going to develop its root structure better, and it's going to be more resilient when it comes around. So if you can avoid that second grazing without the plant having time to recover, then you're winning. But yeah, I don't always practice what I preach, and it doesn't always work like that. But that's the theory, and it does work.
Okay. So how many animals have you got per piece of land?
That you're going like that varies a lot. I've got about 60 breeding ewes at the moment. Okay. I don't have them all on the croft. I had quite a few empties this year and missing a few, so it doesn't all go to plan. But there's about 43 on their lambs in this on the croft at the moment, and it'll vary between like I usually vary the field size depending on the field size. That's how long you leave them in for. So, but it varies a lot. So some of the fields will be like a couple of acres, and some will be less than that. But trying to stick to that kind of three days.
And is it a bit of a mission to move them, or are your fields quite close?
Fields are quite close. Usually, when it's on the same croft, then it's fine. I can do it myself. If it's on a road, then I usually need a hand. But yeah, it works quite well. So lambing this year was like everybody else was a bit of a challenge. I was lambing a little bit later, towards the end of April. And I definitely do that again. I had 3 early lambs in this nonsense that we had at the start of April. I think that was the 12th of April that photo was taken, which was just crazy. But that evening it was beautiful weather, and then we had these sunny nights as well. And this photo was taken last week when I was the week before last when I was giving the lambs their first worm drench and Heptivac vaccine. So that's kind of what I do on my crofts. It's not far from perfect, but giving it a go. And like you can see, my sheep are a right mixture of all sorts. I've got these hill cheviots, or the smaller cheviots. I've got some park cross ones there, and some black faces, and I've got cheviot crosses out of the blackface ewes, and they all do a good job, and I like them all. But the cheviots are my favourite, the hill cheviots, and that's the ones that I'm focusing on.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think my dad says the same thing. That's the sheep he prefers.
Yeah.
As well, but again, he's got quite a mix as well. Okay. So see, when you're talking about lambing, is there any? Obviously, you like to have your lambing season about the April time. Is there any benefit to having that happen earlier? And I know a few people who do. Who'll lamb their sheep earlier in the year, and I was just wondering, is there any specific reason for that, or?
Well, some people do lamb earlier to try and catch an early trade, and try and get lambs away sooner. To do that, you need to feed. You need to feed potentially quite a lot more. This year wasn't a great example for lambing later because the grass wasn't growing. The grass, we were about a month behind before the grass really started growing this year. But you can't base your plan, or you can't change your plan on freak years. If that becomes the norm, then maybe you do need to look at it. And climate change is happening. These changes in our weather patterns are happening, and we need to kind of work out, well, what's normal now, or how frequent are these is a year like this going to be? But I think that I would tend to want to make sheep profitable. You need to be trying to feed them as little as you can, really, and that's not to say that you're starving them. They need to have the nutrition that they need, but if you can get that nutrition into them from grass, that's going to be your cheapest way. And lambing later, to me, makes more sense, so that you can get more of that nutrition into them from grass rather than out of a bag, or this hay, which costs about £6.50 a bale from so, which is just totally uneconomical to be feeding to these type of sheep, which most of these are having single lambs. So yeah, this is not a particularly profitable system at the moment, but could be. I would think. But that sort of takes me on to one of the things that the SCF focus on, and I spend a lot of time doing, is lobbying government, because we have to accept that while we can try and make these systems work better, we can try and make them profitable and make money, it's a struggle, and our land makes that, the natural constraints of our land make that more difficult, and our access to markets and our distance from suppliers and to get inputs. So that's where agricultural support comes in, and one of the things that we do a lot of is lobbying the government to give fair support to crofters. So there's a lot of competing voices in that debate on what future agricultural policy should look like. And it's absolutely vital that small producers like us have a voice in that discussion. So we've left the EU now, so we've left the Common Agricultural Policy and that sort of framework that gave member states a bit of flexibility around how they maybe administered particular schemes, but it was within certain frameworks, and there was a sort of structure that they operated within. And the Scottish Government was given quite a bit of that flexibility themselves. Actually, all of it, really. Not much was dealt with at a UK level. So now we've effectively got somewhat of a clean slate. It's not entirely. I mean, there will be some sort of framework across the UK, and obviously it's driven by what budgets are available. But the Scottish Government now need to come up with what is agricultural support going to look like. So we've been told that up until 2024, nothing's really going to change. There's going to be a period of stability and simplicity, is what it's being called. So there's some reassurance there that the rug isn't going to be pulled from underneath us. But what they do want to try and do is do some pilot schemes and do some work in that period on what new schemes could look like. So I've been sitting on the Hill Upland and Crofting group, which is one of the farmer-led climate groups that were set up by Fergus Ewing in the last session, to investigate some of this stuff and to look at what the options might be. And one of the things that I was just pushing on that group was this idea that we need to reward crofters for what they are doing that is good, and make sure that continues to happen. And it's absolutely vital that any new schemes are suitable for small producers, that they are accessible, and things like front loading, where you get higher payment for the first few, if it's an area-based payment for the first few acres claimed or hectares claimed, or if it's a livestock-based scheme, Headage payments, we won't see a return to that. That's not even an EU thing. That's like World Trade Organization don't like headage payments. So you're not going to see a payment for each individual sheep or anything like that. It will always be tied back to land in some way. But we do have schemes like the hog scheme, where that is based on numbers of animals, although it is linked back to how much land you have. So, but with things like that, I was arguing for a front loading there as well, so that the first number of hogs that you claimed on that scheme would be at a higher rate. So just trying to, there are certain things that you need, and there's a certain level of investment you have to make each year, actually, to be able to keep sheep. And on a smaller scale, that investment is spread over a much smaller base of income and potential income. I think that's why we need more support for this scale of production. And we've got to look at what we're actually achieving here as well, and look at how do we reduce our carbon emissions? How do we contribute to that as crofters? And things like I was talking about, that grazing system, if you get that right, you're improving efficiency, and sometimes I hear efficiency being talked about. If efficiency can mean a lot of things to different people, I think, and in farming, efficiency has been a sort of come to be a bit of a bad word in some circles around intensification and using more artificial inputs and etc. etc. But that doesn't necessarily have to be what efficiency means. Efficiency can mean getting the same but from less inputs. We don't need to produce loads more sheep. We don't need to produce lots more produce on our land. But what we need to do is do that in a better way, and do that in a way that produces less greenhouse gas emissions and supports biodiversity and all the good things that livestock often can do.
Is it financially viable to do that, though? Is that something that a small local man could do with his 20 to 30 odd sheep?
Yeah, so I think that's a good point, and I think that's why, whatever these schemes look like and whatever your end goal is, you've got to acknowledge that some producers may not be able to achieve that, but maybe they're doing something else. Maybe they're grazing a certain habitat that without their sheep grazing it, or without their cow going on it, it wouldn't leave the same habitat for wildlife or for plant life and things like that. So there's a whole there's two emergencies happening at the moment. We've got the climate emergency, but we've also got a biodiversity crisis as well, and we can't focus on one at the expense of the other. And some people would argue that the climate crisis, that's the one that we need to reduce our carbon emissions, and that's where we have to go. Yeah. That's end game if we don't do that. But we can't just do that at the expense of biodiversity. So people saying, right, we need to stop eating beef, or we need to reduce the size of the cattle herd drastically. Well, what do cattle actually do to these habitats that they're grazing? And they are an integral part of that, and species rely on cattle grazing on these areas. So nothing is black and white and straightforward in this. This is nature that we're talking about, and how we interact with it. And it's not simple, and it's not straightforward. And we can't just look at a certain set of figures and say that's what we have to do. It doesn't work like that. So that's on the agricultural support side of things. On crofting law, we're also hoping for a new crofting law bill this session. We don't know if the government will prioritise that or not. We'll just have to wait and see. There was an SNP manifesto commitment to bring forward new crofting legislation, but I think that we'll just have to keep pushing them on that one.
Yeah. What would you like to see come out of that?
Oh, good question. Good question. I think that first and foremost, the bill has to correct mistakes in the existing legislation. So just make it work better. And these are technical things that lawyers have pointed out that just don't work in practice. And a good summary of that is the crofting law sump, which you'll be able to find online. It details the sort of effectively errors and drafting mistakes that were made when the bill was written, or unintended consequences of particular pieces of the previous act. But I would like to see things go a little bit further than that. I think that I'm not going to say exact. I don't have the exact answers for exactly what needs to change, but I think we're having this debate about access to crofts at the moment, and the discussions around the price of crofts. And I know that's a particular concern in West Harris.
Definitely.
It hits the headlines regularly. But that situation is the price of crofts sits out with the crofting regulatory system at the moment. It's nothing to do with the Crofting Commission. It's nothing to do with West Harris Trust, obviously. In your case, nobody has any control over that market. And I think that we are getting to a point where crofting law reform has to deal with that, and we have to think about how can we regulate that market. And there is no easy answer there. I mean, there's options around restricting who you can assign a croft to, but that only works if you have increased regulation, so that you do free up crofts for those people who aren't just going to inherit one. So you can't do. It's not simple, and it will take a vast change in approach. But I think that we need to have those conversations and get it right this time, because it will need pretty radical change to see that situation change.
Yeah, that's a hot potato even down here in West Harris. I've been speaking to quite a few people who again, are saying the exact same thing as what you're saying there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of change that needs to be done there, and it's not just about. I know from a personal kind of perspective, I had issues moving home, as in to find somewhere to live. From that aspect, and but I think that's a whole different other hot topic from owning the croft as well. You were speaking there about the subletting. How does that work? How does the subletting work?
So there's two types of subletting. So you can have official sublets, where you effectively become the you don't. So this is done through the Crofting Commission. You would apply, the tenant of the croft will apply to sublet the croft to you if you were wanting to sublet. You then are able to apply for CAGS grants. You're effectively.
Sorry, but about that, would I, if I was looking to sublet, I would have to go to the owner of the croft, or do I go to the common grazing, or
it would be to the owner of the croft.
Owner of the croft, okay.
Owner of the croft, and then there's a form on the Crofting Commission website, very simple to fill in, and you can get, tends to be 10 years is the maximum. If the person is absent, then they don't like going over 5 years. If the person isn't living.
And is that as in the owner's absent or the sublet person?
The owner's absent. They wouldn't sublet a croft to they wouldn't allow a sublet to someone who wasn't going to be able to fulfill their duties as a crofter to live within 32 kilometres and to work the croft.
And and obviously, as you've just said there, you would have to work the land, And is there any is there any kind of thing that there's certain things that you have to do to work the croft? Like, does it have to be animals, or can you do alternative crofting?
No, you can. There are a wide variety of things that you can do with your croft. If it's not a traditional sort of agricultural thing that you're doing with it, technically you should get I've forgotten the name of it, has escaped me. You're putting permission to put your croft to another purposeful use, and that can either be granted by the landlord or by the crofting commission. Okay. But those are, there's not concrete definitions on what falls into those two categories. But if you're making use of the croft, then the crofting commission will be happy with that. Yeah. But yeah, and then so that's the sort of formal sublet process. But what happens a lot here is that people informally use crofts primarily for grazing sheep, and that there's no formal, like they could be official sublets, but a lot of the time it is just informal use of the crofts. And the thing with the thing to remember with a sublet though is that it's just like any other normal tenancy, not a croft tenancy, where you can be given notice and that tenancy, that sublet could be terminated by the tenant of the croft. And so it's not, you don't have crofters' rights when you're a subtenant. But you can apply for CAGs. But you've got to make that call. You're investing in somebody else's croft there that they could say, But I think subletting is a really, it's a way in for people who can't buy a croft, but also I think it gives an opportunity for the tenant of that croft to see the croft being worked by somebody, and then maybe making the decision, well, they're making a good go of that, maybe we'll work something out to get that croft assigned to them. I don't know how often that would happen. I mean, the problem is that you're dealing with, at the moment, it all comes back to this price issue, and you're dealing with what have become incredibly valuable assets. And, then there's different ways of looking at it. You see a lot of vilification of the people who are buying these crofts. They're not actually doing anything wrong. As long as they are planning to work that croft and make use of it and live and meet their duties, they're not doing anything wrong. They haven't, just because they've been able to afford to pay X amount of money for it. And similarly, the person who sold it is just capitalizing on that asset. And personally, I would question that and what they're actually doing and whether they should. I don't think it's a given. Nobody's forcing you to take the highest offer for a croft. But it's human nature at the end of the day that they're going to try and maximize that, and that's why it comes back to the law, and that something needs to be done to regulate that market if we want to make crofts more affordable for new entrants, and make the system fairer. I suppose, level it so that it's not just the person with the deepest pockets. I completely agree with you there.
I'll just ask quickly. So, is a tenancy permanent? You talk about subletting only being up to 10 years, but whereas a tenancy, I know you don't actually own the croft, but is that sort of in perpetuity?
So So a croft tenancy, it generally would be in perpetuity, and you, but you, as long as you're meeting your obligations as a crofter. So as long as you're a resident, living within 32 kilometers, putting the croft to purposeful use, or using it, and paying your rent, of course, as well. So as long as you're meeting those rules, then yes. There are some quirks where new crofts have been created, and the landlords of those crofts have withheld some of those rights. I think possibly some have withheld the right to assign, or restricted the right to assign. But there's only like 100 new crofts have been created since that became a thing. So it's not that widespread, but in general, old crofts that are covered by the full Crofting Act, yes, they are effectively, that tenancy is effectively yours. And there is the right to buy as well. So you have the right to buy the croft at 15 times the annual rent, which again is another thing that we've been questioning. It's not SAF policy to question it really, but we've been having discussions about whether that is important or whether it's actually doing some damage. I mean, particularly in the context of community-owned estates, where it just doesn't seem to make sense anymore. To have the right to buy. I mean, there is a better way to do it, and that's to buy the whole estate as a community.
So, in Carloway, you guys have bought out the estate there, have you not? Yes.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. So, is it easy for somebody in Carloway to buy a piece of land to actually work it? Is that pretty straightforward? Because it's community owned, or does the estate do they want to keep it under that banner and then have more of a community development approach to it?
Well, I mean,
rural development approach.
It's the same situation as West Harris, in that all of the land is under crofting tenure, so the estate has very little control over what actually happens on that crofting land. We try and take an active role in engaging with the grazing committees, but at the moment that there isn't really a role for the estate in the transfer of tenancies or like trying to find land for people. I mean, we take quite a pragmatic approach when it comes to people looking for building plots and things like that, but generally it's take the lead of the grazing committee and support them in whatever they see as the right approach. And whether there's a greater role there somewhere down the line, again, this is going back to the crofting law reform. Do we acknowledge the fact that we do have these community landlords now, and do they take more of a role in crofting administration on their estates? There's arguments for and against that. But it's certainly the landscape has changed, and since the crofting acts have gone through so many iterations, and actually where we find ourselves going back to discussing is actually the fundamentals of it back in 1886 and the very first acts are actually the things that we still think are really important a lot of the time, and some of the things that have been added along the way in the acts in the 50s and in the 76 Act have actually just caused problems and caused a lot of confusion, and were done with the best of intentions, but possibly haven't benefited crofting.
So you could say then that there's a little bit of a benefit of having that clean slate, of being able to rewrite these acts and laws. And
it certainly is. I would always lean away from the total clean slate approach. I think that those fundamental rights, I don't think they've changed. I don't think we've changed our thinking on what it means to be a crofter, or what the rights and responsibilities of a crofter should be, as outlined in the 1886 Act. But we need that to reflect the situation we're in now, and look at what's been added along the way. The really important thing is, and I would say that you have to question all of it. Even don't hold the 1886 Act sacred either. The only reason that this law exists is for the benefit of crofters and crofting. And if it's not benefiting crofters and crofting, and I would probably add on to that our communities as well. If it's not doing that, then it shouldn't be there, or it should be reformed. If it's not achieving those aims, so we shouldn't get bogged down in, the law says that, so we can't do that. If you think that something will make our communities better, or will be better for crofters or crofting, and it's the law that's stopping you doing that, then we need to try and get that law changed. And that applies across the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's just very, very, very crystal clear in crofting.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys have a lot of young crofters within Carloway then? Is there a lot of support for young people coming through almost?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that the vast majority of crofters are older and are and as a demographic it is aging. But I think we've seen in recent years more young people taking an interest. I think probably taking an interest and operating at perhaps a slightly bigger scale than people have in the past as well.
In what sense? How are they going?
Like I was saying, like I've been doing, working a few more crofts, and that sort of how you see it, like in every township there'll be a couple of younger people who are maybe a bit more active and are working a few crofts at a time.
Yeah.
And again, that should all be we should always be questioning these things and saying, is that right? Is that helping crofting? But at the end of the day, the land is being worked, then that is a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yeah,
but it's whether the opportunities are there for new people to come in, because we see at SCF a huge interest from people who want to get into crofting but can't, and the reasons that they can't are varied, but sometimes it's availability of crofts. It depends how picky you are about where you want to live, I suppose, at the end of the day. But a lot of people say it's about finance, and it comes back to that price of crofts issue. So we need to make sure that there are opportunities for the new people who want to come in.
Yeah. And is there what, I think you've already touched on this, but what support is there for new tenants?
There's plenty of support for,
like, what is it an incentive for these new crofters?
Yeah, well, there's enhanced grant rates for new entrants on CAGs. There's also some payment for your basic payments. There's a small uplift. The new entrance schemes have been closed since 2018. I think it was 2018, but they've been closed for ages.
Yeah. And is there support? Is there support for those who have had no experience but who would like to, I don't know, like to dip their toe in the water a wee bit, or who are looking to maybe try alternative methods of farming, whether it's trees, beekeeping, anything like that, or even beard making, anything like that? Is there support around that area?
So there's the farm advisory service delivered through Scottish Agricultural College, SAC Consulting. And they provide there's one-to-one advice, and there's also they also do courses and things like that. SCF actually did run a training program in the past, and we want to resurrect that again. But the most popular one in recent years was beekeeping. That was really, really popular.
Yeah, I've seen a big upkeep in that. There's actually going a little off topic. Is there not a boy over in your neck of the woods?
Yeah,
I'm trying to get hold of him, but I can't. He's not replying to any of my messages.
Oh no!
So it's infuriating. I just think something like that. I think it's good for people to know that there is methods of farming out there that's not just about cattle and sheep. You know what I mean? Like you can, whether it is beer keeping or something else, that it's not this narrow view that you have to do it this way. It's quite nice to hear.
No, I agree. I think we need to. You need to be flexible. And one thing that we're seeing a big increase in locally, and I think this is happening across the islands, is polycubs going up everywhere. A lot of people looking at those, and these things have the potential to produce a lot of food. So it's kind of like, what's the next step there, and how do we start getting people to market that locally? Lots of people are already doing it. But...
Yeah, we've actually, we're getting one built next month, so that's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. We've done well. I've done a tour of the one in Shawbost.
Oh yeah,
and the setup they've got there's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
So it's kind of good to see that there's these methods happening. Just finishing up, what's next for SCF and for yourself? What's in the plans? What you guys got coming up?
Well, a lot of what we've discussed there, this access to craft stuff is on our agenda. It's something that we want to be talking a lot more about and seeing some action on.
Yeah.
Next week, I'm meeting Mary Goujon, the new Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and Islands. So I'm going to be speaking to her about the things that we want to see happening in this parliamentary session, and focusing on that agricultural support and the development of that policy. So it's really those two policy areas around agricultural support in the future there, and law reform with a particular focus on access to crofts. Those are the two main things. But we will be looking for more development opportunities for the organisation. Hopefully trying to resurrect our training programme. We're also doing quite a bit of work on the Scottish Crofting Produce Mark, which we run, which we think there's a lot of potential in, and working closely hopefully with the Crofting Commission on that one. And we do try, and we meet regularly with the Crofting Commission, and it's really good that they've now got their development officers based in Western Isles as well. Karen McRae is based
yes.
Calpe.
Based in yes. Yeah. I know Karen well.
So that I think there's some good developments there, and we actually want to see more of that happening. More commission staff being based in the crofting areas rather than all being in Inverness.
Central, yeah. And how about you yourself at a local level with your own croft? Have you got any?
Well, I want to keep on sort of building up my numbers and get my fences sorted, and train Meg the sheepdog Meg the collie to be Meg the sheepdog.
Do you compete quite a lot with your dogs in that?
No. She's far from being trial ready. I've never had a dog before, so
okay.
She's my first. So I think if I can get her to get the sheep in a pen for me and help me a bit on the moor, I'll be very, very, very happy.
Are you getting any tips and advice of anybody locally?
Yes, plenty tips and advice, and YouTube helps, and
local advice, whether that's more of a hindrance than a help, I suppose, is the way it goes. Jeff, have you got anything else that you'd like to add?
I was going to ask about the markets for the sheep. Is it primarily off island, and is it all meat? And are there any local markets for you?
Yeah, so good question. I do keep I keep some of my wider lambs, the castrated males, through the winter, till at 18 months in Stornoway, 18-20 months, and I sell a few of those mainly to just friends and family.
Yeah.
But I might I've got quite a few coming through this year, so I might advertise them. It's fantastic meat. It's really at that age, and it's sort of different to what you get in the supermarket. But the vast majority of lambs produced here are sent away store, so they're sold in August, September, October time, and they're sold through there's sales in Stornoway, and there's sales in Dingwall and Thainstone, and lorries will leave to go to the Dingwall and Thainstone sales. Most of those lambs, some of those lambs are killed straight away for light lamb, and some of them are ready to kill and are within supermarket spec as well. But a lot of them go to farms to then graze through the winter, either on dairy grass or on a forage crop or something, a crop that's grown specifically for them, and then they're killed in the beginning of the year, right the way through. The last ones are like, it's really the tail end are being killed just now, but but we've now got the new season lamb from the early lambers coming on the market now. So prices have been the highest ever, pretty much, the last season, which is surprised everybody. We were doom mongering for what Brexit might bring, but in the end, we got a trade deal. It may not be the best one, but we got a deal with Europe, and it meant that the trade didn't crash. And yeah, it's been very, very buoyant. So this is always peaks at Easter time with the hogs and the new season lamb. It then starts to tail off, and when we're selling in August, September time, that's bottom of the market, because that's when everybody's selling. So whether the prices will stay strong or not, we're yet to see.
Yeah. So, I mean, is there not sufficient local market to take, or is there sort of in effect overproduction in order to sort of export to the mainland?
Good point. And I really, there is at the end of the day, there's two reasons for that. So there's more lamb produced here than would be eaten here.
Yes, yeah.
So there is an overproduction. It's produced for export, effectively.
Oh, yes,
which is an important part of important aspect to the economy, is that you are bringing some money in that way. But the other side of it is a practical one around. It is, although I've kept these wedder lambs through the winter, I've actually got to balance up the cost of doing that, and I'm not sure if it works. Whereas on the mainland, where they've got a bit better ground, the better set up to deal with running them at scale and larger numbers, makes more sense for them to do that finishing job, and we are better at doing the breeding job. Now, if we can improve the lambs that we're producing in the autumn, which a lot of crofters have done, and have a better lamb being produced at the end of the year at sale time, then it's ready to be killed. And there is an environmental argument here that the shorter time between birth and killing the lamb, the lower its environmental impact, as long as you're not pumping it full of food that's been produced on an unsustainable way, but the less greenhouse gas emissions it's producing. Now, I'm not saying I fully agree with that. I think that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. And there was a debate about that around cattle, which just totally disregarded the fact that the native breeds of cattle take longer to finish and are good for grazing and go back to the biodiversity argument. Anyway, that was a very long-winded answer.
No, that's fine. It's interesting.
But your point is right in that, if we scale down, if crofters decided, right, we're going to finish all our lambs, you'd maybe keep a few less sheep.
Yes.
And have more space to finish the lambs. Yeah. And produce to sell locally at maybe a higher price. But
I mean, I wasn't suggesting scaling down. It's just interesting to know whether there is a potential market locally for the meat, or whether there is more than that. Because I mean, so much meat must come off the mainland to the butchers.
Yeah.
Because I rarely see. Well, the thing is, we normally get a hog off our neighbour anyway every year, so we don't tend to buy mutton or lamb from the butchers, but I think a lot of the butcher meat seems to be imported to the island.
Yeah, almost exclusively. I mean, there's a few butchers that do buy some local lambs, but the slaughterhouse is only open between August and December at the moment. And it's an excellent service. I don't think there's another local authority in Scotland that runs a slaughterhouse, so we're very lucky that we've got it. And we need to push for them to keep on running that. I don't think there's been some suggestions of community ownership of it, and I'm a very big fan of community ownership, but I don't think that running a slaughterhouse is something that the community should be looking to take on. I think that's the longer the council can carry on running that, the better. But anyway, that's a slight barrier. But that's the time when people are killing here, so it's there's scope there for much more local consumption.
Well, what about the wool? The cheap
wool is on the floor at the moment. It just a lot of the British wool goes to make carpets, and the luxury carpet market just collapsed with COVID. So it's things like cruise ships, hotels, that sort of stuff. It just wasn't. They weren't buying carpets, so there was no demand for wool. Price collapsed, and it's slowly climbing back up. And wool has been a pittance for years, but it just completely collapsed last year. But there's I'm quite a big supporter of the British Wool Marketing Board. I think that they are, it's a good organisation. I think it's good to have a marketing organisation that pulls the wool together and then gets the best price for it at auction. What's happening now is, and we haven't seen them here yet, I don't think, but there's some buyers who are going around and buying wool direct off farmers.
Okay.
Now those buyers they're the same people who are competing in the auctions, in the British wool auctions. If they've already bought wool off farm, they're not having to buy as much at the auctions, so the price, there's not as much competition, the price goes down. So we're in a really dangerous situation with wool, where if the British Wool Marketing Board collapses, or if people stop sending their wool there, then wool really will be worth nothing, because these buyers aren't going to keep the price up when they don't have to. And we also, they support us with haulage, and it's, you have to drop the stuff off in Stornoway now. I don't know if there's a collection point in Harris now, but certainly for us, we have to drop it off in Stornoway, and it's a bit of a pain, but it's better than nothing.
Is there anything more that can be done to support that market, or even just support the local farmer for that?
So yeah, I suppose. I mean, actually the Cheviot wool is pretty, as far as wool goes in the country, like it's one of the better ones. The blackface wool is really, really rough. Like it's not really suitable for anything other than carpets. But the Cheviot wool is quite good, and maybe there is a potential market there. But you do get people with rare breeds and interesting colours and things like that. They can make a bit of money selling the wool to hand spinners, that sort of thing.
I was going to ask you. Yeah, I've seen Sweeney up in Ness turn some of his wool into that. Do you think is that a viable market, or?
I think it's always going to be niche, and if you've got the time to invest in that, and Sweeney's made a fantastic job of growing a social media following so that he has a market to sell that to, and he's done a fantastic job of that. And if people are willing to put the time and the hard work into getting to that point, then yes, it's a perfectly good way to try and make more money out of each animal that you have. And I think that's what he does very well, is he tries to maximize the value from each of the animals that he has, and does a very good job of it. It's not for everyone, and it comes down to time at the end of the day for a lot of people, and how much time you're willing to invest in a product like that. You don't get anything for nothing.
No, absolutely not. I think that's about us. Is there anything else you'd like to follow up with, Jeff? Or?
Well, I'm just going to say thanks so much. That was really interesting. So we've been here about 6.5 years living among crofters, and as a newcomer, it's very easy to think it's an old man in a flat cap herding a few sheep, but it's so much more sort of technical and legal detail. So it's very good sort of educational on sort of how the traditional crofter has to survive now.
Absolutely.
There's a lot more to it than meets the eye, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Just on that note, for the SCF, how can people get in touch? Is it a way? Is it just through the website, or
check out our website, www.crofting.org. It's actually a relatively new website we set up last year, and it's it's got loads of good information on there, information on how to join, and contact details there as well, for emailing the office or getting in touch with myself or anybody else involved in the organisation.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time, and I'll make sure I post all the links up in the post. But thanks to Donald. No doubt we'll probably be in touch soon about hopefully setting something else up soon. So,
all right, no
That's
problem.
great. Thanks so much.